The Church of Our Fathers by Henry Roland, Chapter 12, Faith and Teaching. The great center of the religious life of the people was the church. The Middle Ages developed the plan of the early Christian basilica. The little wings on the sides near the apse were extended so that the ground plan came to have the form of a cross. The early basilica had to be roofed with wood. The problem was now to make a roof of stone. The Romans had used what is called a barrel vault. It is heavy and takes massive walls to hold it up, and it has to be made all in one piece, with the aid of a long scaffolding. Romanesque architecture in the Middle Ages found a better way to build by the use of ribbed vaulting. On 4 pillars rose the 4 ribs, bending over and inward to meet each other in a knob above the center of the square formed by the pillars. 4 other ribs rose from the same columns, and by pairs at each end arched in to meet each other at a point. This framework was then roofed over. The advantage was that a section like this could be built at one time, and since the whole push was on the pillars, they alone needed support. The Romanesque churches made the pillars double thick. The Gothic architecture grew out of the Romanesque by making the vault pointed and by setting supports for the pillars a little distance away with arms called flying buttresses reaching across. The roof now would be lifted to great height. Stones seemed to no longer have weight. Ribs soared like the topmost needles of evergreens in northern forest, and the roof outside was crowded with pinnacles and spires reaching for the stars. And there are biblical reasons why people condemn spires, but that's another issue. Windows in the Gothic cathedrals could be plentiful and large because the outside buttresses did away with the need for thick walls. The glass was set between shafts of slender stone, branching at the top into leafy tracery. In the larger space below were the set windows and colored glass, done in designs to tell the story of the faith. At first, each different color had to have a separate bit of glass. The pieces were leaded together. The patterns of a small window in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris is shown in the picture of Luxury on page 119. Notice the lead in connecting her right hand with her face and her left hand with the arm of the chair. When a window was so large and in many pieces, the lead was not strong enough to prevent swaying before the wind, and iron bars had to be set across without regard to the pattern. Later artists found a paint which, when heated, would melt right into the glass and become part of it. Then a whole head could be painted into it on a single piece. Brilliant colors were used: crimson, blue, and purple, often not the original tints of the object. A window at Sens, for example, of the prodigal son, tending swine, has 1 pig green, 1 blue, and 1 red. The total effect was breathtaking as the evening sun went down behind the rose window, casting soft, warm, enchanting rays upon the cold gray stone. Stories were told in the windows of creation, of the flood, of the sacrifice of Isaac, the crossing of the Red Sea, of Jephthah, Samson, and Jonah, then of Christ in the manger walking on the water, suffering on the cross, ascending to the right hand of his Father. Here was the Virgin Mary weeping over her Son, are exalted to heaven to be crowned by God. Here are the lives of the saints: Christopher carrying the Christ child, Anthony fighting the devils, Augustine in his study, Jerome with his lion. All that a man needed to know for his journey from earth to heaven was told in the storied panes. Now we find the 78 themes of the tarot, literally, well, the 78 different pictures of the tarot within one of the cathedrals. So, but the problem was when they put it into a deck, people took issues like, ooh, they're, taking it out of the church. And other uses that happened with it too. But in the portals of the doorways and on the ledges set in the pillars, statues were placed, carved, not according to natural size and shape of the human body, but taller and sometimes misshapen to give an impression of movement as figures springing heavenwards. The statue of Peter has movable parts lengthwise: the arms, the legs, and the neck, in comparison with the trunk and the head, to make the figure appear as if it were stepping right out of the stone. The statues were often painted, and in the picture, the artist is shown putting the paint from the bowl into the statue of a Virgin Mary. Usually the images were of serious subjects, like the characters in the Bible are the saints, but sometimes grotesque forms were used of devils or of animals. These are called gargoyles. These were especially used for water sprouts and hideous leers, splitting cloudburst into the streets below. And an interesting thing is that in a lot of cultures, they gave the devil his due, and that was part of it, right? After the Gothic came the Renaissance Cathedral. We shall see in the next chapter what the Renaissance meant. The Renaissance Cathedral was something like the Byzantine in that it had a dome, but the dome itself was lifted almost like the vaulting of the Gothic. There was this difference from the Gothic, however, that the dome had no spaces below the ribs, and, in consequence, the windows had to be set in order below the rim of the dome. The light thus came from the bottom rather than from the top of the building. The underside of the dome, being unbroken, could be painted. Some of the great religious paintings of the Renaissance are on the ceilings. The cathedral was built by the community to haul the materials. Kings and queens and men and women of high estate harnessed themselves to wagons. The heavier stones required 1,000 men hitched to the same load. In silence they pulled, and in unity. And if any refused to forgive another, the hard-hearted one was cast out of the traces. The children and wagons of their own to pull, and chose their own kings to lead them, and though so young in nimbleness and speed they outdid their elders. The cathedral was thus a spiritual home, the more so because everyone helped to make it. The people pulled, the merchants gave their money, the guilds or companies of workmen such as the bakers, brewers, smiths, and carpenters presented this window or that. The architects, artists, and craftsmen vied with each other in the faith that they pleased the Virgin in adorning her house, like Mary's going to know, right? Viewed from a distance, the cathedral with its spires and towers and flying buttresses appeared as a great ship in which man might sail to heaven. At the portal, one supposedly met Christ on the cross, the one sure pilot. About him were arranged the statues of the patriarchs and the prophets of the Old Testament and the apostles and evangelists of the New, together with the martyrs, saints, monks, and missionaries of the Church.